It is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer here with you on a Friday in January. We got a lot to talk about. We are going to run through the list of candidates for the Ravens head coach opening. We're going to be joined by Giana Han to discuss how the Ravens players heard about John Harbaugh's firing and what their reaction was. All that and much, much more. But first, let's get a quick word from our sponsor.
For the fifth year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
Before we run through some candidates for the Ravens head coaching opening, I do want to read out a 5-star review that we got on Apple Podcasts, because that's what we do on this show. If you write us a 5-star review, I will read it out. Got one from Adam Bobadam, who says, "This is my favorite Ravens podcast. Just the right amount of analysis mixed with some lighthearted commentary. Jonas does a great job of summing up the big picture as the season progresses, including the banger of a quote that perfectly encapsulated the 2025 Ravens season that was, 'It was never good, and now it's gone, and we should have known all along.'" Jonas, terrific wordplay, terrific rhyming. Thank you for that 5-star review. That was from our season-ending podcast. We have one podcast in the meantime where we reacted to the firing of head coach John Harbaugh. If you don't follow us on any of your favorite podcast platforms, you can do so, and also watch live on X, Facebook, and YouTube. All right, Jonas, let's run through some potential candidates for the Ravens head coaching opening. We're going to talk about a list of guys that have either interviewed, have scheduled to interview, or have been requested to interview with the Baltimore Ravens. And then we're going to throw out some names that don't fit those three categories, but guys that we're interested in nonetheless. And as you have probably seen on social media, the Ravens tweet out when they have completed an interview with a head coaching candidate. As our friend Kyle Goon pointed out, the Ravens did not even have a Twitter account when they hired their last head coach. They started their Twitter account in 2009. John Harbaugh hired in 2008. A sign of the times, isn't it, Jonas?
It was a simpler time. Some would say a better time.
Some would say a better time. And if you are wondering why your favorite head coaching candidate has not interviewed or has not scheduled to interview, and you're confused and frustrated, there are a lot of rules in place that Jonas has written about on thebanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months. Here are the basics. The Ravens can start interviewing candidates not employed by another organization as soon as they have an opening. So they could have started that as soon as they fired John Harbaugh. Those are for candidates who are not employed by a different team. Coaches of teams that didn't make the playoffs can be interviewed virtually now. It's been a couple days after their season has been ended, so they can talk to whomever. For the two teams that have a playoff bye, so we're talking about the 2-1 seeds, the 1 seed in the AFC, which is the Denver Broncos, the 1 seed in the NFC, which is the Seattle Seahawks, virtual interviews can be held this week. For assistants coaching in the wild card round this week, the Ravens can have virtual interview of up to 3 hours beginning Tuesday. So that time frame has passed already. They can have those. The Ravens can begin in-person interviews with assistants who are under contract with other teams on January 19th. So that's 10 days from now. Unless those teams are alive for the conference title games, those coaches must wait until January 26th, when either they are eliminated from the playoffs or they have that bye week in between the conference championship games and the Super Bowl. And then finally, of course, the Ravens must abide by the Rooney Rule, which was implemented in 2003 to boost minority hiring. Before hiring a new head coach, teams are required to conduct in-person interviews with at least 2 diverse minority or female candidates who don't currently work for the team. All right, Jonas, are we ready to run through some of these potential candidates that the Ravens are interested in?
Let's do this thing.
All right, so far it's a list of retreads and newbies. It's more retreads than newbies, guys that have already held head coaching jobs in the NFL. And then there's a list of a couple guys that have never held head coaching jobs. I'm going to start with 3 guys who have been head coaches in the NFL before and are currently working as defensive coordinators for other teams. Robert Saleh, Vance Joseph, Brian Flores. Robert Saleh, of course, is the San Francisco 49ers defensive coordinator. They play the Eagles this weekend. He was the New York Jets head coach from 2021 to 2024. a team that went 20-36 during that time frame. San Francisco's defense, since he has taken over that job, the job that he had previously before he was the head coach of the Jets, is ranking 20th in yards per game allowed, 13th in points per game allowed, but has dealt with quite a lot of injuries. This is one of those instances, Jonas, where you look at the record and obviously it's pretty terrible. I think a lot of people look at the state of that organization when Robert Saleh was in charge, and they didn't have a lot of great players. He was dealing with Zach Wilson under center, and I think a lot of teams are probably willing to throw out some of that time that he spent with the Jets.
Yeah, I think probably the most enlightening quote about just what he meant to that Jets team was from Bill Barnwell, which was in his final 17 games as Jets coach. And again, he was not the Jets play caller on defense like he is with San Francisco, but he obviously was responsible for a lot of game planning, mentality, all of those intangible stuff that go into playing defense. But final 17 games in New York, the Jets were first, I think, in EPA per play allowed and like points per drive allowed in the next 17 games. So he was fired, I believe, 5 games into that 2024 season. They were dead last in both those categories. So basically the exact same, there's overlap with the same season and overlap with a lot of those same guys, but that Jets defense just completely fell apart without him. And, it's tough to make of what he has done in San Francisco this year because you lose a Bosa, you lose a Fred Warner. Certainly, it's understandable why that pass rush has fallen apart. It's understandable why the run defense has fallen apart. But you look at the quotes from those 49ers players, and they're talking about just how he has kind of emphasized the need for strain in everything that you do. Just, that little bit of extra effort that will get you off a block or get you to force a fumble or get you to stay in coverage for one step longer. And I think you could say, just based on how the Ravens finished the season against Pittsburgh, that they have not really played with the kind of strain that has become synonymous with this franchise. So the advanced analytics don't really love what this 49ers defense has done this year. I think they've gotten by just basically because of what they've been able to do, I guess, in the red zone with not allowing a huge amount of points that is kind of commensurate with what their actual talent level and more big picture efficiency numbers suggest. But he's going to be a guy who I think is going to be a culture setter. Probably will be more of a Harbaugh type in terms of not calling plays and just administering the big picture of things. But there are definitely pluses and minuses. It seemed like he really got kind of wrapped up with the possibility that he would lose his job in New York. Like there's an athletic story about just the breakdown of his tenure there, where he became obsessed with leaks, became obsessed with just how unlucky his team was. I don't really get the sense from John Harbaugh that was ever on his mind when things were going bad in 2018 or this year. So that is going to be something that I think, the Ravens would have to kind of probe during this interview process, if indeed he does come in and interview and become a finalist.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard job being head coach of the New York Jets, not just because the Jets are perpetually terrible, but because you're dealing with New York media.
Woody Johnson.
Yeah, the ownership there. It's not a good situation. And so it is a little bit understanding. You can look at Robert Saleh's time in New York and have a little bit of understanding for what he went through, but at the same time, it didn't go particularly well. This is, for all of these retread candidates, this is an opportunity for Steve Bisciotti, for Eric DeCosta to talk to these guys and learn from them about what they think went wrong during their head coaching time. And for Saleh, he at least is a year removed from the time when he was a head coach. So maybe he is able to look back at that with some clarity. Next up, Vance Joseph, the Denver Broncos defensive coordinator. Of course, the Broncos have that bye, so the Ravens were able to talk to him and they completed their interview. He was the Denver Broncos head coach from 2017 to 2018, went 11-21 during that time frame. But look at the quarterbacks again during that time frame. We're talking about Trevor Siemian, Case Keenum, Brock Osweiler, Paxton Lynch is the guys that started under center for him. And then after he was fired there, he went to Arizona, where he was the defensive coordinator for 4 seasons. And then he went back to Denver for the last 3 seasons, where the Broncos have ranked 3rd in points per game allowed each of the last 2 seasons. Jonas, this is kind of a small thing. I do give credit to somebody who goes back to a place where they were the head honcho, where they were the head coach, and they're willing to accept a smaller role. Like, I don't know if I could do that. I think that is like a difficult thing to swallow your ego like that and go back to that same locker room after you have been fired. And I do give him credit for that. And then, of course, the resume is incredible over the last several seasons with the Broncos.
Yeah, I think it's easy to pigeonhole guys as like this is the guy the Ravens are hiring because they want to fix their blank. But I do think that if you bring in Vance Joseph, it is because of the hope that you have in him reinvigorating this pass rush. Like the Broncos pass rush last year led the NFL in sacks. This year it led the NFL in sacks. Franchise record in successive years. None of those top four guys, you're talking about, Nick Bonito, Zach Allen, John Franklin Myers, Jonathan Cooper. Only two of those fellas were day two picks. I think both of them were outside of the top 50, outside of the top 60. The Ravens have invested draft capital in finding edge rushers and having guys who can become stars. It just hasn't happened. And, obviously having Pat Surtain be a guy who can make everyone's life easier on that back end shouldn't be overlooked. But the way that he has talked about kind of playing defense, playing holding up in that secondary is interesting. Like he talks about kind of wanting a box and one type setup where the and one could be your shutdown corner and makes it so much easier for everyone else in the rest of that defense who can play man coverage, or they can play a soft zone, or they can play an aggressive zone, fire zone, whatever. But I don't know if the Ravens, with Nate Wiggins regressing and Marlon Humphrey maybe having his best days behind him, are anywhere close to PS2 in terms of that role and just the force multiplier effect that you would have in that role of the defense. But I think considering how good his defenses have been, even when he was a head coach, again, you said the problem with those Denver teams was the offense. I think it's easy to understand why he would be attractive to the Ravens in this particular role.
Yeah. And then finally, Brian Flores. And this guy has been drawing a lot of attention from Ravens fans, even going back to midseason when Ravens fans were keeping an eye on other guys who were rising through the coaching ranks. He was the Miami Dolphins head coach from 2019 to 2021, went 24-25 during that time frame. He took over a team in Miami that was built to tank, basically. Their first year was tank for Tua. They did so. They got Tua, and then things kind of went awry the next couple of years, despite the fact that, they overperformed that first year. Since becoming the Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator, the Vikings have been 5th and 7th in points per game allowed those last two seasons. We talked about him earlier this season on this podcast when the Ravens played the Vikings, as the reputation that he's built as a Lamar stopper. Lamar got the better of him the time that they played midseason, but not Lamar's best game of the year. But, the Ravens came out victorious over J.J. McCarthy's Vikings. In terms of what he was like as a coach in Miami, we get kind of conflicting reports. The first year of Tua Tagovailoa's tenure in Miami, he was kind of yanked in and out of the starting lineup, was back and forth with Ryan Fitzpatrick there. That may have hurt his confidence. If you are looking at the negative side, I think if you're looking at the positive side of Brian Flores' tenure there, you could say Brian Flores knew before anybody else that Tua Tagovailoa was just not that good. And then I think Ryan Fitzpatrick's comments this week recently about Brian Flores have what's that?
I think they're from last year, just recycled this year.
Oh, from last year. Okay. They have been recycled this year, have drawn a lot of eyes as well, because he was talking about how Brian Flores, quote, became a dictator and that he basically alienated most of his staff by the time he left Miami. A fascinating candidate, Brian Flores, is here. And I think a lot of Ravens fans look at him as somebody who could bring the teeth back to this Ravens defense, but there certainly are some beige, if not red flags here.
It's interesting because I think as of this recording, Friday afternoon, I believe the Ravens are the only team to have requested him, and there are 7 other vacancies in the NFL. Certainly the pending lawsuit that he has against the NFL and a couple teams for their hiring practices has become a little bit of a point of intrigue in terms of just how interested are owners in doing business with this guy who is looking to take money away from the NFL. But it seems like he has done a good job of rehabbing his image in Minnesota. Like, obviously, he had that 1 year with the Steelers under Mike Tomlin. Maybe that, kind of led him to reshape what he thinks are best practices for running a team. But it seems like a lot of Vikings players have really come around to him as a coach. Not that they were ever out on him, but just the fact that he's become a guy who has engendered a lot of buy-in from that team. Obviously, the results speak for themselves, despite not having a whole lot of talent, especially in that secondary. So he's a guy who I think could really become a dark horse coach for the Ravens, or a dark horse candidate. Just like, you look at what he's done with that Vikings defense, you look at the background that he has in New England, the fact that he has special teams experience, I think could resonate with Steve Bisciotti. Like, the fact that we saw John Harbaugh's ability to kind of connect with guys and get the best out of guys because of that special teams experience, just knowing that you're going to have to connect with the player 53 on the roster as much as player 51 if you really want to be this kind of maximalist coach. I think it's going to be interesting. I just have no clue what kind of questions he's going to get, or what kind of sticks in the road there will be for someone with his background. Because I think if they weren't there, if you didn't have those beige to red flags, he would be kind of an obvious top of the list candidate for me.
Yeah, he has an interesting resume. I mean, he was, I think, the linebackers coach. Was he also the special teams coach in New England? He basically spent his entire coaching career with New England before he got hired as the Dolphins coach. So he was a little bit of an outside the box hire when the Dolphins hired him.
Yeah, he was never even a coordinator before he got that head job in Miami. He was a special teams coach, not a special teams coordinator. Maybe that was something that Bill Belichick kind of managed there. But he's got an interesting story. Like, he grew up in Brooklyn to Honduran parents, played at BC, which has become kind of a hub of NFL GM types, NFL coaching types. So maybe those connections would help him populate a potential staff. It's going to be interesting to see just how quickly, or if he moves along in this process, as the Ravens pick out their finalists.
Yeah. All right. And then two more retreads we should talk about. These guys are on the offensive side of the ball. Matt Nagy, Kansas City Chiefs offensive coordinator. Of course, he was the Chicago Bears head coach from 2018 to 2021, during which time the Bears went 34-31. Spent the last 3 seasons as KC's OC, which was the role he had before he got hired by Chicago. The Chiefs offense the last 3 years, 15th, and 21st in points per game during those seasons. And then Cliff Kingsbury, 46-year-old Washington Commanders offensive coordinator. He was the Arizona Cardinals head coach during the first few years of Kyler Murray's tenure there. Bit of a surprising hire coming out of the college ranks when he was hired as the Cardinals head coach. It's been reported that the Commanders and Cliff are parting ways this offseason regardless. So he is going to draw head coaching interviews from other teams, including the Ravens, and he is going to be out in Washington no matter what. The reputation he has is he builds kind of some would say gimmicky style of offense, an offense that is easy for quarterbacks to understand and to process, and leads them to great success in the first year or two, but then kind of becomes solvable after that. Look at Matt Nagy and Cliff Kingsbury. Do you like either of those guys, Jonas?
I don't. I think Cliff is probably like the part-time, like the short-time solution. If you're really just insistent on the idea that you get a top 3 offense in the next 2 years, and you're not worried about the long-term viability of that offense beyond that. Obviously, what he did with Jaden Daniels as a rookie and a questionable offensive core around him was unbelievably impressive. The way that he's been able to connect with so many different quarterbacks over the years. Like, he overlapped at USC with Caleb Williams for a little bit. Obviously, he was the Patrick Mahomes coach at Texas Tech. He's worked with Kyler Murray and got the best out of him. But there is that cliff where once you fall off, it's really, really tough for him to find a way back. And then with Nagy, it just maybe you bring him in just to ask about Andy Reid and his process and that Chiefs culture. But even though Nagy has not been the play caller, because we all assume it is Andy Reid calling the shots for 95%, if not close to 100% of those drives in Kansas City, this Chiefs offense has just looked stale the past couple of years. Like, these past few years have not been anywhere close to the best out of the Mahomes experience, and that is just not attractive to me as a candidate overall.
Yeah, and the way things went in Chicago, I don't think you could say that he was
Justin
exactly
Fields, botched.
yeah.
Mitch Trubisky, botched.
Yeah. All right. Two newbies, two guys that have never held a head coaching job in the NFL, have had their connections to the Ravens. Davis Webb and Clint Kubiak. Davis Webb, 30 years old. Jonas, I'm 30 years old. I don't know what I could have done over the last 10 years to warrant this, getting a head coaching interview with the Baltimore Ravens. Maybe if I had been a third-round pick by the New York Giants, perhaps.
Maybe if you'd been 6'4" and had a rocket arm, your prospects would have been a little bit better in life.
Yeah.
Instead, you're blessed with a golden voice, Paul.
Couldn't we all? He is the Denver Broncos offensive passing game coordinator and QB coach. Had that first title added this past offseason after he was the QB coach for the previous couple of years. He pretty much went directly from playing on the field to coaching, was always kind of viewed as a future coach, and at 30 years old is already drawing some head coaching interest. And then Clint Kubiak, 38-year-old Seattle offensive coordinator, of course, the son of former Ravens offensive coordinator Gary Kubiak. Spent one season in Minnesota as the offensive coordinator, then one season as the New Orleans Saints offensive coordinator, and then the 2025 season in Seattle as their OC. Those teams ranked 14th, 24th, and now first in points per game, respectively. Clint Kubiak certainly is the name that a lot of Ravens fans have been saying for the past week. What do you like about Davis Webb and Clint Kubiak?
Yeah, Webb is, I think, the guy who, just because we don't know that much about, you could almost talk yourself into him being like having the most potential among these.
He could be anything. Yeah. He's a mystery box.
He could even be a boat. But like, I think for anyone who just needs a kind of refresher on all these candidates, I would suggest looking at the list of kind of background info from SI.com that Connor Orr put out. There's just nice little bios, nice little quotes on a lot of these guys who have become, in fact, involved with the Ravens. And I think maybe the most interesting quote was from Cliff Kingsbury, and it was talking about Davis Webb, because Davis Webb actually played for Cliff at Texas Tech. I think he was one of his first quarterbacks there. Or actually, I think he was there toward the end. But anyway, he said, if I had a son playing quarterback, I'd want him to play for Davis Webb. I think that says a lot about where this guy is. The fact that Sean Payton, an offensive genius himself, handpicked him to kind of rise through the ranks. I don't think that Bo Nix is a quarterback who you would look at and assume, is capable of leading a top 15 offense, especially considering the Broncos' kind of paltry weapons. But I think they're number 14 in offensive DVOA right now, which you give a lot of credit to Davis Webb and to that offensive staff for figuring some things out. There was a clip that I think went viral earlier this year of Davis Webb kind of getting in Sean Payton's face when he was chewing at Bo Nix for something that Bo Nix actually did well, and it was good process, bad result. So it was interesting to see him kind of go to a bat for a quarterback like that, despite being a relatively junior member of that staff. So that, this is like a really intriguing name. I think it's probably more likely that he would be the guy that Vance Joseph brings along as his OC in a situation where Vance Joseph gets the job. But who knows? Maybe Steve Bisciotti, with his eye for talent, sees this guy as a potential next Shanahan, next McVay, next Andy Reid, and maybe his stock really starts to rise with the Ravens looking at him. And then Kubiak, obviously, he has the ties to the Shanahan system. He obviously has the ties to Baltimore through his dad. He doesn't have that kind of win the press conference mentality. He just watching a couple clips of him, he doesn't really command the screen in a news conference, even like a Mike McDonald would, with this kind of quiet intensity. So I don't know, if that lack of charisma, if you want to call it that, is going to be held against him. But the fact that he has these ties, the fact that they've been able to get another Pro Bowl season out of Sam Darnold, JSN leading the NFL in receiving yards after only having, I think, 1,200 last year. managing to work around a interior offensive line that is probably even worse than the Ravens, I think are all points in his favor. You just wonder a little bit about, for 2 years in a row now, blazing hot starts and then things fall apart a little bit. With New Orleans last year, it was because they just had terrible injury luck, especially on the offensive line. Obviously, no one would have trusted David Carr to really be the manager of a top 10 offense. But this year, they've obviously had their bumps and bruises along the way. But you have seen Sam Darnold become a little bit more injury prone. This offense become a little more, easy to figure out. But there's a lot of stuff that he does that kind of align with what works well in the modern NFL. It's bigger personnel on the field. It's a commitment to balance. It's under center, setting up the play action. It's using a fullback if you feel like that's advantageous. So I think a lot of what he has done well and likes to do well would kind of set up pretty nicely with what the Ravens already have in place.
So a couple other guys that we talked about last week: Kevin Stefanski, Jesse Minter. Kevin Stefanski, of course, the former Browns head coach. Jesse Minter, the Chargers defensive coach. I think should draw attention from the Ravens. I think probably will draw attention from the Ravens. Those two guys are certainly popular candidates. But Jonas, when you look at this list right now, do you have a favorite?
I'm thinking about it just in terms of like what staff I would like to assemble. And I think for me, again, this might just be dream casting right now. It might be a totally unrealistic possibility. But I think if you bring in Brian Flores as a guy who can take this defense back to being a top 5, top 10 unit, and then if Mike McDaniel gets passed over for head coaching opportunities, and we don't really know what his market will be so soon after he was fired by the Dolphins, but I think he would love to have a toy like Lamar Jackson and someone like Derrick Henry and the offensive line, enough offensive line talent, especially mobile guys up front like Linderbaum, assuming he resigns, Ronnie Stanley, Roger Rosengarten, Derrick Henry.
The running game
that
would be insane with
that would
Mike
be a
McDaniel.
fascinating. Yeah, you would have like the most as interesting as the Ravens were to watch after the snap last year. Like what Brian Flores on defense and Mike McDaniel would show their respective opponents before the snap would be worth the price of admission. You would just have mugged up looks on defense. You would have so much whirligig, chaos, confusion on offense. Who knows if those guys would fit together on a staff? I think that's a very important consideration. Like typically, you hire guys that or guys who come highly recommended. It's tough to go to work in an environment every day with people that you don't like. That's just kind of those are the facts of life. But to have those two guys and maybe a young up and comer on defense who can learn the ropes from a Brian Flores, I think would be a dream combination for the Ravens.
It would be very funny to assemble two former Dolphins head coaches, because part of the reason I think the Dolphins fired Brian Flores was to bring in somebody who wasn't, as Ryan Fitzpatrick would say, alienating his staff or becoming a dictator. Like Mike McDaniel is known as a player's coach. And so to combine those two guys would be a fascinating comparison, fascinating combination, I should say. I think the obvious quandary with that is that if you are hiring a defensive first head coach and you are hiring an offensive coordinator under him who has head coaching potential, the likelihood, especially considering that offensive head coach, that OC, will have Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, that guy could get hired away within a year. I mean, you could lose your OC within a year. And then do you really want to be starting over again on offense with a new playbook, with a new system of a new offensive coordinator and having to replace that guy? Whereas if you hire former OC as your head coach, then you potentially could have some continuity on the offensive side of the ball, because offensive coaches get hired way more quickly and easily than defensive coaches. But if you want to try to make that marriage work, and you think that if Mike McDaniel has a terrific first year and the Ravens win the Super Bowl and he gets hired away, who cares? And then you're able to replace him, then that's fine with me.
Right. It's just a matter of you have to operate in the realities of what this coaching cycle is. And wrote about it for a roundtable that's going up early next week. But considering the candidates who are currently available, I think it's easier to find like a defensive guru head coach and an overqualified offensive coordinator to pair him with than it would be an offensive guru head coach and an overqualified defensive coordinator to pair him with. I just think, again, I don't know the reputations of these guys around the NFL as well as a Connor Orr or certainly Steve Bisciotti, Eric DeCosta. But considering those names and considering just how much time we spent talking about defensive coaches and defensive candidates, it seems like that would probably be the smart thing to do. But again, it's all it takes is one candidate to just knock Steve Bisciotti's socks off and to win the job.
Yeah. Well, we will have plenty more coverage on thebanner.com as we have a coaching tracker there, which Jonas is updating constantly. Going to have Giana Han on the other side.
For the 5th year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
Now we're joined on the Banner Ravens podcast by Giana Han. Giana, we used to give out a Who's Got It Better Than award on this podcast. I think Jonas and I have to retire that award.
Yeah, maybe a new name for it once we get a new saying.
Yeah.
Because every coach has their saying.
They do. I wonder if any will have as repeatable as phrases as catchy of phrases as John Harbaugh had. He had 18 years. I mean, he had a lot of time to build up a lot of different catchphrases.
True. Although that came from his dad, didn't it?
It did. Yeah.
So, he had several generations of phrases.
Exactly. I think what we can guarantee is the next guy will not have nearly as many catchy phrases. We are going to talk with Giana about the great reporting that she's been doing on thebanner.com. And Giana, you came out with a story the night that John Harbaugh got fired about the player reactions to the news. First and foremost, how did a lot of these players find out that John Harbaugh had been fired?
I think this is becoming more common with the rise of social media. We can talk about a lot of things that become more common with the rise of social media, but the news broke to Twitter or X before the team was able to get itself together. I think a lot of reports have indicated, and what we've probably heard has indicated, this happened really fast. We saw insiders talking about how they didn't anticipate changes at head coach. They expected the Ravens to stay with Harbaugh. And then even just, the statement that Harbaugh came out with, that first line was just, it sounded more like a response to a text than a prepared statement. It sounded like he wasn't super prepared. So
it had an emoji in it.
Yes, I
that
feel
was
like
the
we
craziest
could do
part of all of it.
a whole breakdown of the emoji.
Yeah.
But so all that to say, there are normally proceeds for these things, maybe a little bit more anticipation, but it happened so fast in general within the organization. But then on top of it leaking, that players found out from, Twitter or from friends seeing on Twitter, because this all happened the day after exit interviews. So a lot of these guys are out of here. They're packing, they're making arrangements. Maybe they're doing their last shopping or whatever they want to eat while they're here before they go. And so they weren't necessarily on their phones checking for this. And then their phones start blowing up. I've got to say, I'm guessing a lot of them put their phones on Do Not Disturb because their phones are probably blowing up. So it just happened so fast. And then the team scrambling to catch up decided to have a Zoom meeting for the players, but they only gave them a 5 minutes heads up. It came in somewhere around 5:55 p.m. for a 6 p.m. And so I actually heard from multiple players who weren't able to make the meeting because they were in the midst of their whatever they were doing and couldn't jump on at 5 minutes notice.
Yeah. And what was some of the reaction that you heard from the players?
I think universally, and by no means did I talk to everyone, obviously, because you have your relationships. There's a lot of guys didn't answer as well. But the ones I did hear from were all shocked. And this is from not just players, but people around the organization. And leading up to this event, I think that I had heard from some of them that they just never expected it to happen. One said, if there's anyone that's a Raven through and through, it's Harbaugh. He is arguably more the face of this team than Lamar. I mean, Lamar is the best, and I think he's the farthest reaching, but Lamar's also only been here a few years, and Harbaugh's been here lifetime. He's been here as long as a full adult, legal adult,
Yeah.
to have been born.
Yeah, the kids that were born when John Harbaugh was being
Yes.
named head coach
are 18. They can vote now.
Yeah, they're in college.
So his tenure is voting age. So I think that along with the insiders, they didn't expect it to happen. And that's not to say they don't think it's the right move. They just maybe weren't even thinking about it because they didn't think it was possible.
Yeah. You wrote that some of the players may have expected that a coordinator would go, that Zach Orr or Todd Monken would go, but or perhaps even both.
I think that was something I heard a lot from. It was kind of undeniable that they were going to move on from a coordinator, right? Like, not just from the outside looking in. It just seemed like fact. Both of these units performed so far under expectation. Like, you got to do something.
Yeah, it seemed unlikely that the coaching staff was going to stay intact.
And like, I guess the something they did is Harbaugh and everyone else, but with the way what we'd heard about Monken through the season, even though Zach Orr, like, the players love him and they would say they should bring him back, I'm sure something in their minds had to have wondered, will they actually bring him back? Are they going to give him a longer release than 2 years? Which we can break down how I feel about in a whole other setting. But this is the prime. This is the window. Are they going to keep sticking with Zach Orr and Todd Monken when that window is starting to close? And so certainly it felt like, and again, that reporting from NFL insiders also indicated there was going to be change at the coordinator level. And, you know, I think that's maybe also what some of the players would have wanted.
Yeah. Let's talk about Todd Monken specifically, because you came out with a story earlier this season when the Ravens offense was kind of sputtering. Obviously, there were plenty of factors for what was going on there, Lamar Jackson's injuries, but there were some sources that you talked to who had direct knowledge about it. And they talked about how the Ravens would work on something during the week and then get to the game and not run those same plays. There was kind of an element of chaos and confusion at times, and that how some of these sources said that Todd Monken was increasingly standoffish and unwilling to collaborate with players. Todd Monken, when the Ryan Ripken show a few days ago, he said, quote, "I didn't coach Lamar Jackson well enough. I didn't have as good a relationship as I could have. I didn't do the things we needed to do this year to win enough games and to give ourselves a chance. I believe that." When you look at this current staff with Todd Monken and Zach Orr, there was also a national reporter out there who said that part of the reason, I believe it was Diana Rossini that said part of the reason the decision was made to fire Harbaugh was because there was a disconnect between Steve Bisciotti and John Harbaugh as to whether Todd Monken should stay on as offensive coordinator. What have you heard from the team about the job statuses specifically of Zach Orr and Todd Monken?
Yeah, so I think you probably haven't seen, you meaning the readers, a lot on the banner about these different theories because they're kind of that right now. They're a little bit unsubstantiated, I think, unless you hear directly from Harbaugh, Lamar, or Bisciotti. We don't know that any of this is true. The Monken theory is, for me, I can see both sides of it. It's hard for me to believe that Harbaugh, who kind of threw Monken under the bus a lot this year, would be so attached to him that he would put his own job on the line. But at the same time, I could see him being like, these are my decisions to make, not the players, right? So that's why I haven't jumped on either one of those. And I think that, again, I don't know who could necessarily confirm or deny that. What I can confirm is that there were issues with Monken. I've had a lot of people bring up to me, from fans to radio shows, etc. Like, I didn't think that there were issues with Monken. It seemed like Lamar and Monken were buddy-buddy. And again, Lamar is mysterious, so I don't want to speak for him, but certainly Monken was not buddy-buddy with the rest of the offense. There might have been guys that really liked him, but I heard a lot of discontent with him. And as you mentioned, we reported that, but, you know, sometimes memories don't run that deep. But, I mean, this discontent goes back a few seasons. However, they were winning. And winning cures all. And so the reason that, I will reiterate, well, we did a podcast on this as well, the reason that I started looking into Monken was because when everyone was calling for Zach Orr, and Harbaugh just vehemently defended him, and the players just were like, he's the guy, you know, they stuck up for him. They'll always stick up for him. I started asking, it's so, like, why aren't the offensive players doing this? Why isn't Harbaugh doing that to Monken? And I opened a can of worms. And I found out why. It's because he is he can be a little bit difficult, and he has that rapid tough love, but maybe they didn't feel the love part of it. And so when things start to fall apart, that becomes more of an issue because winning's not curing it all. And so I think that it is feasible to me that players wanted to move on from Monken or Lamar, which again, we haven't heard from Lamar. All we've heard from is Lamar Jackson Entertainment, but we don't actually know who runs that, I don't think. So I don't think we can take that.
That account has been pretty active recently.
They've been very active, and I don't think we can take it as Bible until we know who it is, because that's about as good as an anonymous report, right?
Right.
And so I like that Monken, he is very willing to take fault. However, I did ask him about his relationships with players, and at the time he said it was great. And that just wasn't what I was hearing from my sources. I hate but like in and around the building.
Sure.
So there's definitely a problem there. And again, we go back to the difference with Zach Orr, and that doesn't mean that Zach Orr, I think there's a balance sometimes of players love coaches that were players because they've been here before, but that age-old saying that the best players don't make the best coaches. Sometimes coaches are the people that couldn't play, but their brains can pick it up. And so I don't know how high Zach Orr's ceiling is. We got glimpses of it, but again, do we have the time to find out?
Right. Yeah. I mean, with Todd Monken, we had 3 seasons, and we saw some incredible peaks. We also saw this year the offense take significant steps back. And it's not just the injuries that they suffered with Lamar Jackson and others. And it's not just the offensive line. It felt like as a unit, they took a step back. And defensively, Zach Orr only had 2 seasons. He took over a unit that was phenomenal the year before under Mike McDonald, and took significant steps back in his first year. But he had the same thing happen both in 2024 and 2025, which was the season starts out horribly. He's able to pick it back up, but at the end of the year, you're still sort of left with a middling unit. And we saw their flaws exposed in that final game against Pittsburgh too, with 2 touchdowns scored in the final 8 minutes. So both of these guys, I think, made great contributions to the Ravens team that made the playoffs back-to-back years, was one of the best offenses in the league, looked like one of the better defenses in the league for stretches. But both of these guys, I think you could say there were areas where they certainly came up short.
And I think it's hard to judge, and I've seen this in defense of Harbaugh a lot as well, and I think you could apply it to the coaches, is how do you account for players making uncharacteristic mistakes? Like, Mark Andrews dropping the ball last year, or Derrick Henry fumbling 3 times in 3 games.
That's not really a coaching thing.
It isn't, but at the same time, when it's uncharacteristic for that player, but it becomes characteristic of the team in big moments. And something that I have tried to ask Harbaugh about was when you do have players who know what they're doing, right? Like Derrick Henry has built this entire career on being dependable. He is at the point where I don't even know what a coach necessarily does for him at practice, because he already knows what works. Maybe they research new ideas or they help him keep motivated. I can't imagine Derrick Henry needing anyone to help him stay motivated. But so how do you coach that? Because it's clearly not something he doesn't already know how to do. So just repping it more. He's repped it for a decade. What does that do? So it's got to be something psychological, and they've never really answered that question for me. I'm sure I know they have a team sports psychologist, and I'm sure they do stuff, but I do want to, maybe that's not working, or maybe they need a different approach. How do you get these guys ready for those critical moments? I mean, I played high school sports, right? I'm nowhere near these levels, but I remember the psychological tools that my coach gave me to be ready in those moments. So I know they have to have something, but it really becomes a question, is it just the players who are falling down, or is it the coaching that needs to be able to make those players not fall short in the big moments.
Yeah.
I don't really know exactly where that answer is, but it's shout out my dad. He texted me after the game. This is the new definition of what it's like to play like a Raven.
Yeah.
Because it is. I mean, every big moment this year, someone has fallen short. And it's like, yeah, maybe Zay Flowers has done it repeatedly and not just in the big moments. But it'll be Zay Flowers. But then it'll be, like I said, Derrick Henry, Mark Andrews, like just guys you don't even Lamar, like he has gotten better about it, but it was him too. So it's kind of inexplicable, but I don't know if you need a new philosophy or you just need to shake it up.
Right. And I'm really interested to hear what owner Steve Bisciotti has to say during his press conference on Tuesday. First time he's talking with non-team reporters since 2022, I believe. So it's been a while.
I've never talked to him on the record, I should say.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're going to find out more, hopefully, about what went into his decision and what he thinks needs to change specifically.
And I know that that's in the past now and it's time to look for the future. But for our roundtable that will be coming out next week, we were asked what do we want to hear from him? And the reason I want to know the why is because I think that will determine the path forward. If it's because of Lamar, as people are saying, that gives us an idea of the importance of Lamar, the dedication to Lamar moving forward. And it also raises questions of how much power Lamar will have, or if it's because of the players. You know, the players love Bisciotti. He gets really high grades on player reports, but that's going to bring up questions of like, okay, why? Like, at what point did you decide to give the players more power over the coaching staff?
Right.
So that's all. And that will also determine what type of coach they bring in, what type of coach is willing to come here. I can't imagine a long tenured coach coming in and wanting to give the players more power than him, or even a player more power than him. But at the same time, like as a young coach, you want to set that precedent. I don't know. So I think like the reason we need to uncover what happened is so we know what to expect for the future.
And I think Ravens fans are being hit with a lot of contradictory reporting at this time.
Yes.
And that's why we hope that Eric DeCosta and Steve Bisciotti will be able to clear some of this up, because even this week, I mean, two of the biggest names in NFL reporting were contradicting each other.
Yeah.
I mean, Ian Rappaport said John Harbaugh had lost the locker room and that his relationship with Lamar was in trouble, and that was the reason he was fired. And then Adam Schefter of ESPN came out and said none of that is true. So you're getting a lot of different things from a lot of different people. Todd Monken, when he was on the Ryan Ripken show, said, I never saw Lamar and Coach Harbaugh not have a great relationship. I never saw that. So that is his perspective. We're getting all kinds of different things from different reporters.
And it's hard to say because, I mean, there's a difference between having a good relationship and it being the right coach for you.
Sure.
And maybe Lamar has thought of that, or the people around Lamar have thought about that. I can't say I've super noticed the moments between Lamar and Harbaugh. I mean, there are obviously those big moments, but that's going to be anyone, friends or not. If you're on a sideline together and a big moment comes, you're going to celebrate together. I do know, again, back to Monken, I'd heard reports that maybe they aren't as buddy-buddy as people think they are. Certainly sources didn't see them interact that much. He maybe interacted more with other players than Lamar. Again, don't know if that's on Monken. He's taking it on himself. He's saying he should have cultivated a better relationship, or if it's on Lamar. And I think maybe a lot of the uncertainty of this year probably didn't help. But then there's always going to be shades, right?
Right.
Where certainly there were probably guys who didn't like Harbaugh, or they just were ambivalent about him. That's kind of the messaging it feels like. I don't want to say it's for sure, but like all these players are posting yesterday. It almost felt like a coordinated effort. They all posted yesterday, and none of them mentioned Harbaugh. None of them had a picture of Harbaugh. A lot of them posted not just Ravens stuff, but just life went on, which it kind of does, even though some of them I think are a little bit nervous about what's next, as they should be, because I don't know. I'm this is not coming from Teddy. I'm just like coming up with a player, but let's just say Teddy's going to come in injured, right?
Teddy Buchanan.
Yeah. Yes, Teddy Buchanan, rookie linebacker. And he played pretty well this season, but on top of that, this coaching staff saw how hard he worked, right? They saw what went into it. And if a new coaching staff comes in, they might not know that about him. And so all they're going to see is this player who now has to reprove himself.
Right.
So I think there are a lot of players who are in that situation. So we saw like ambivalence, we saw nervousness, we saw some players stick up for him. And then people are like, oh, taking that as he didn't lose the locker room. But like locker room's a bigger group. It's not individual players. And I think that my experience in this locker room is it's like a lot of little groups. It's not like if you have one group, you have the whole group.
Sure.
I also don't know the truth about players crying in his office. Maybe a player or two, but I wouldn't say a whole bunch of them because I do think, like I said, I think a lot of these guys are out of here or didn't have time or weren't in the building. So yeah, it's just like a lot of contradictory things that I think maybe I would say to our listeners, be careful about what you jump on. You can have your own theories too, of course, but until we know from Bisciotti or if Lamar surprises us all and decides to speak, we don't actually want to take any of this as Bible.
Right. And I think in our few years of covering Lamar, and Jonas Shaffer, who's covered Lamar his entire Ravens career, can say Lamar is an enigma. He is a difficult person to figure out.
I mean, I like Lamar. I, as you know, don't go to press conferences if it's during locker room because I prefer to be in the locker room. That's where I do my work.
Right. The podium opens at the same time as the locker room after practice.
I leave Jonas to do the podium. I go in the locker room, which means I don't get a lot of Lamar's podium. So I don't necessarily have that sort of relationship with him. But we'll, can I curse?
You can curse,
we'll shoot the shit in the locker room here and there. I mean, it's always a little bit touchy to go up to the quarterback in any locker room, but especially the Ravens one. But I mean, we'll talk about completely not related things at all. If people know the legendary story of one of the first things he asked me is if I'm a Capricorn. But I mean, I've heard his frustrations from this year as well. I don't want to share too much, like I said, because it was off the record. But even in those, it's still a little bit unclear. We love to always say, like, his saying this year is like, I can't call it.
Right.
And sometimes it actually really makes sense. He used it to me the other day and it was very telling, but sometimes it's like, but then who can call it? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Even just like having covered his off-season activities this summer with like the horse racing
stuff that he posts on his Instagram stories.
His random GQ last summer, the summer before. Everything he does is like, it's really, people ask me if he's a diva and it's like he's like the most down-to-earth guy that you've met, but there's just like certain things in his life that he works differently than the rest of us.
Yeah.
Like he does not run and he refuses to play the game. So that's why I'm like, I don't know if we'll ever know the truth unless Lamar suddenly decides that that's what he wants. But when has he ever decided he wants to clear things up?
Yeah. It's all very interesting. We have so much more coverage on thebanner.com. Gianna, thanks so much for hopping on and talking about Lamar Jackson, the Ravens, and so much more. She's written already about 80 articles since John Harbaugh got fired, and there will be plenty more. We will have another episode for you, I think, after Steve Bisciotti talks on Tuesday. So plenty more coverage coming your